Around the year 2500 BC, in the Bronze Age, the British Isles were inhabited by a pre-Celtic people known as the beaker culture. Little is known of them, but it is believed they built large collective tombs and other kinds of stone alignments, such as Stonehenge. Over time, waves of Celtic-speaking people arrived from the European continent, who would soon come to inhabit most of the island. The Brittonic, Gaelic, and Pictish people would be the major culture groups, although these people were not unified, but rather many tribes who shared a similar pagan religion, language, and culture. In the 1st century AD, the Romans would invade what's now England and Wales, but failed to conquer the Pictish tribes to the north. The conquered lands would be incorporated into the Roman Empire, becoming the province of Britannia. They brought Roman customs and laws, improved infrastructure, and connected many towns and cities with Roman roads. When the Romans left in the early 5th century, there would be great migration of Germanic tribes to the island. These included Anglo-Saxons, Jutes, and Frisians. In the 6th century, many kingdoms would form in southern England. Later in the 7th and 8th century, the kingdoms of Bernicia and Deira would form Northumberland, and in the south, Mercia and Wessex would rise to the dominant powers. In the west, Wales would be made up of several separate kingdoms, the largest known as Gwynedd. The British Isles soon saw numerous Viking raiders from Scandinavia. They began to settle on many of the Scottish Isles. Eventually, the Picts and Scots would unite into the Kingdom of Alba, or what became Scotland. Meanwhile, Danish Vikings arrived in the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms for conquest. After fighting the King of Wessex, Alfred the Great, the Danelaw was formed, a land where the laws of the Danes held influence over the Anglo-Saxons, controlling the region and its affairs. The Anglo-Saxons eventually defeated the last Viking king and established the Kingdom of England. Although in the 11th century, the newly formed Kingdom of Denmark would conquer England and even had a short-lived dynasty under Canute the Norseman. Under his rule, the kingdom became the center of government for the North Sea Empire, which included Denmark and Norway. Canute was succeeded by his sons, but in 1042 the native dynasty was restored with the ascension of Edward the Confessor. But Edward's failure to produce an heir would cause a conflict over his succession on his death in 1066. Harold Godwinson would initially be elected as king and managed to defeat the Norwegian king Harald Hardrada. However, Harold would be defeated and killed by William of Normandy at the Battle of Hastings, and William would be named King of England. After a civil war from 1139 to 1153, Henry II would succeed to the throne and marry Eleanor of Aquitaine, establishing the Angevin Empire, beginning a long rivalry against France. Richard the Lionheart defended much of this territory and also became a central Christian commander during the Third Crusade. He was succeeded by his younger brother John, who lost much of those territories, including Normandy, following the disastrous Battle of Boivines in 1214. King John raised taxes after several expensive foreign wars, and the barons rebelled and forced John to sign the Magna Carta, a charter that established the principle that everyone was subject to law, even the king, guaranteeing individuals the right to justice and a fair trial. In 1286, at the death of Scottish King Alexander III, Scotland was left with 14 rivals for succession. To prevent civil war, the Scottish magnates asked Edward I of England to elect a chairman. John Balliol was elected king, but was constantly undermined by Edward, who opposed Scottish independence. Edward decided to launch several campaigns to conquer Scotland and depose King John, to which he acquired the nickname Hammer of the Scots. Under the Scottish knight William Wallace, the Scots mounted resistance against the English, defeating them at the Battle of Stirling Bridge. Edward marched north in person and defeated Wallace in battle. It allowed Robert the Bruce to rise up and defeat the English, securing Scottish independence. When the King of France died without an heir, Edward III was technically eligible to the crown through his mother. The French courts denied his claim and instead installed Philip of Valois. Edward would pay homage to Philip as he owned the lands of Gascony and was essentially a French vassal. Due to disagreements, Edward would reassert his claim to the throne and invade France, beginning the 100 Years' War. The English achieved notable victories at the Battle of Crécy, Poitiers, and Agincourt, but were unable to conquer the French with the appearance of Joan of Arc, who turned the tide of the war. Upon the death of Henry V, an entire generation was skipped in the line of succession, which prompted bitter rivalry between several claimants. Most notably were the houses of York and Lancaster. Tensions were high until a bloody age of warfare erupted between these two factions in the War of the Roses. The wars ended with the emergence of the Tudor dynasty. In 1558, Elizabeth I ascended to the English throne and only gave half-hearted support to several poorly equipped military campaigns in the Netherlands, France, and Ireland. The major conflict with Spain came between 1585 and 1603, when the Spanish attempted to invade and conquer England, resulting in a resounding defeat for the Spanish Armada in 1588. When Queen Elizabeth died without an heir, her closest male relative was James VI of Scotland. James would be elected as King of England and Scotland in a personal union, although the countries remained separate political entities. In 1607, England built an establishment at Jamestown, which would eventually grow into the 13 colonies. This was the beginning of colonialism by England in North America. Tensions would rise between Charles I and Parliament following disagreements. Conflicts between royal and parliamentary authority within England led to the English Civil War. The country became divided between Roundheads and Royalists. Under Oliver Cromwell and the New Model Army, the Parliamentarians defeated Charles and executed him for treason. Cromwell became Lord Protector and dissolved the monarchy, but shortly after his death it was restored under Charles II. However, the power of the crown was less than before the Civil War. In 1685, a Catholic James II became king in a largely Protestant nation. James' daughter Mary and her Dutch husband William were both Protestant, and many nobles unhappy with the Catholic king invited William. William found considerable support when he invaded, and he was soon crowned King William III in what became known as the Glorious Revolution. In 1707, the kingdoms of England and Scotland would formally unite, forming the United Kingdom of Great Britain. In North America, the British expanded their colonial empire to the Caribbean and would found the East India Company in 1612. In 1714, the reign of Queen Anne ended, the last monarch of the House of Stuart. She was succeeded by her second cousin, George I of the House of Hanover. Great Britain soon found itself drawn into several European wars, most notably being the War of Spanish Succession and the 7 Years' War. And these wars resulted in territory for the empire, particularly in North America, with Britain gaining full control of Canada, although it did result in considerable debts. In order to make up for this debt, King George III ordered heavy taxes be placed on the 13 colonies. This, among other reasons, culminated into the American War of Independence. With financial help from France and Spain, the Americans were victorious. In Asia, the East India Company had grown rapidly, even operated its own military, and controlled a sizable amount of territory. Meanwhile, Captain James Cook arrived at New Zealand and the southeast coast of Australia. Britain claimed what is now New South Wales as a new penal colony, with the first convicts arriving in 1778. Back in Europe at the end of the 18th century, Europe witnessed the French Revolution and the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte's French Empire, which would be opposed by a coalition of European powers that included Great Britain. The Napoleonic Wars, which lasted from 1803 to 1815, saw the British Navy play a pivotal role in preventing Napoleon from invading Britain. The British Army was also a key part of the coalition that defeated Napoleon's army at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, signaling the end of the Napoleonic Wars. In Ireland in the 1840s, the Great Famine would strike, a disease killing potato plants without any aid or food. Ireland's population plummeted by half due to starvation and immigration to countries like the United States. The Industrial Revolution occurred in Britain from the late 18th to mid-19th century, characterized by the mechanization of the textile industry, the innovation of new energy sources like coal and steam power. In Asia, between 1839 and 1842, Britain would gain control of Hong Kong and the Opium Wars. By the mid-19th century, South Africa, Malacca, nearly all of India was under British rule. In 1857, India would see the Sepoy Revolt, which would be put down and would see the change from company rule to direct control from the British government. In 1884, the major European powers would come together at the Berlin Conference to divide Africa between them. Britain would most notably gain Egypt, Somaliland, and British East Africa. From 1914 to 1918, the First World War would take place, and Britain would emerge as a significant participant in the conflict. The empire would reach its territorial heights in 1921. The empire now ruled over 400 million people and controlled 1/4 of the world's landmass. Many nations in the empire would begin gradually gaining independence, and Britain would form the Commonwealth of Nations in 1931 to retain ties. In 1922, Ireland would break away from British rule and form the Irish Free States, and shortly after became a republic. The Second World War would last from 1939 to 1945, was even more brutal and horrific than the first, but the war ended with an Allied victory. The war put serious strain on the British Empire, and many nations within the empire would begin pushing for independence. India, Pakistan, and Burma would all gain independence in 1947, and by 1997 almost all of the British Empire would gain full independence. Although many had been mostly autonomous for decades, the British Empire officially ended with Hong Kong, Britain's last colony, being handed over to China in 1997. The United Kingdom would suffer a small economic recession in 2008, but has since recovered. The UK remains a member of NATO, the United Nations, and the World Trade Organization. In 2016, a referendum was held in which voters were in favor of leaving the European Union in what's known as Brexit. The United Kingdom remains a major player on the world stage and maintains many ties around the globe with its former colonies. Thank you for watching our video on the history of Britain. If you enjoyed, please consider subscribing and checking out one of our other videos. If you have video ideas, comments, or criticism, please let me know them in the comments. And as always, thank you for watching The Knowledge Show.